Okay, welcome all. We're here today doing a webinar from our respective places of work / residence. The title of this webinar is Digital Transformation with Spatial Technology. And I'm delighted to have with me here today two speakers, Mr. Tim Sinclair, who is the Principal Manager of the Digital Customer Experience at TFNSW, and also Mr. Peter Bowen, who is the Director for Spatial and Data at New South Wales Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. My name is Chris Hoare. I am a Principal Consultant with NGIS. I should say, before we lead into the agenda, it would be good to have a bit of an intro from both our speakers as to their roles and what they do. I know, having dealt with these two gentlemen, that Tim is a big advocate for the GovHack program, and we might post a link so you can all have a look at that for the next time it comes around. And Peter is an avid cyclist, as you might have noticed from the bike on the wall. So Peter, first, could you just give us a bit of a rundown of what your role and responsibility is at DPI?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So as you mentioned, I'm the Director of Spatial and Data at the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. So our role is to get our users access to spatial information when they need it, how they need it, and in a format they need. So we look after corporate spatial databases, we look after spatial applications, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and the management and operational needs of those. That's pretty much it.
Yep, very good. And Tim, how about yourself?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I've been with Transport for New South Wales for about 5 years now. I joined in the roads area, what was Roads and Maritime Services at that time, and my team is really dedicated to about digitizing solutions for our customers and for our employees. So looking at the processes that we work with internally and seeing out ways that we can digitize those, and looking at what our customers' needs are and what they're after, and delivering on solutions for them as well.
Very good. Thanks, gentlemen, for that. So I guess today we're going to cover a few things. Obviously, what the current state of play is in terms of how spatial has been introduced to the digital process. We're going to talk about some of the challenges you experience in your day-to-day working with that, and also we're going to have a look at a few examples of some projects that we've been fortunate enough to be involved in that we think have been quite successful. So I suppose the first question is, why are we going through this digital transformation phase? And as I've expressed to a few people before, we're already well within it. We're talking about ways of working as far as I can see, and certainly spatial is a firm part of that. I had a conversation with a colleague of ours that works for EPA, just talking on the ways of working and digital transformation, and she said it's kind of lucky that we didn't have this happen 2 years ago, because at that time it would have been very difficult for us to be working remotely. You know, we had problems with simple things like access to laptops and whatnot, but now it's pretty much BAU working in the way that we are working. And I also realized that we've ourselves delivered a few projects over the last couple of years where the entire project team, client, our people, everybody involved worked entirely remotely. So yeah, I guess my point is there. This is very much almost a way of working now. Perhaps if we could start with Tim. You know, are you finding the same sort of experience? Is, you know, despite this being quite an unusual situation, is it also, you know, relatively easy and supported by the transformation we've gone through to be working as we are?
Yeah, look, I think this period of time has definitely accelerated things, and you know, that things are happening at a pace that you know, wouldn't happen in the usual business cycle. However, certainly us as an organisation, and I think government more broadly, has been moving in this direction of being more digital for the past 4 or 5 years. I mean, I was specifically brought on board into transport with that goal in mind about how can we be more digital, how can we be in the places that our employees and our customers expect us to be, in delivering in the ways they expect us to deliver. And so we've certainly been on a really on a journey for the past 4 or 5 years, and with our ways of working, and particularly in the last year or two have really embraced those things like working from home, and the technology challenges and uplift that's required to actually make that happen, which has actually made the transition to the current situation much easier for us than, as you say, it would have been 2 years ago. Even 12 months ago, we tested it across our entire organisation, and once we found that we had about 1,000 concurrent users onto our network, we had problems externally. But now all of those issues have been overcome, and actually the transition now has been quite seamless. And it will continue to grow and accelerate. I think this will be this will fast track a lot of things that will become commonplace going forward into the future.
Yeah, indeed. And Peter, do you find the same experience? I remember, again, several years back, there was issues about bandwidth, and no, we can't consume web services because the internet's too slow and P drive isn't where we think it should be. How's things within DPIRE?
Yeah, look, a very, very similar trajectory to what Tim was talking about. We're as we became DPIRE after last election, we doubled our numbers of people in our agency and cluster, and our geographic footprint expanded correspondingly. So it created a challenge for us to some degree that we didn't get many more resources. We had the same pool of people to do twice as much work almost. So that pushed us to a way to do things a little bit smarter, how we deliver data to people, not pushing so much data around, using single points of truth and services. And then now with the current situation, that's accelerated once again, as Tim was saying. So the ability to work from home and access all the systems and the information that you need is really important, and getting away from hard copies and paper and manual processes is becoming really important in this current environment, because we can't do that now. So we have to find smarter, cleverer ways of doing it, and it's about going digital and getting people to work digitally. So yeah, it's a good time.
Yeah, indeed, and I think that probably leads us into a little bit more, perhaps, Pete, on what have been the challenges specifically when you've or as you've progressed through this journey.
Yeah, okay. So we got two big challenges, I guess. So we're a big cluster, 17,000 odd people, probably not as big as transport. But we have numerous business units, and across that we have different levels of maturity in how to use digital and what does digital transformation mean. There's a lot of business units that go along the lines of, I've done it this way for 20 years, I'm going to continue to do it. That's a little bit challenged in this current environment, working from home. We have other business units that want to go digital, but don't know how to get there and come to us for some assistance. The second challenge for us is technology, or infrastructure and technology. So how do we make best use of things like the cloud? How do we create a flexible licensing system for the software that people use for Spatial? Are there ways that we can be a bit smarter in how we set it up so that we're not consuming lots and lots of licensing and that license cost? But how do we put the infrastructure in place to support it? So that includes networks, servers, security, which is a big thing for us, making sure our systems and data are still secure. So yeah, really for us, it's two big challenges: infrastructure and businesses understanding or maturity of those different business units.
Yeah, and I guess on the infrastructure side of things too, I suppose it's important to remember that Spatial is a bit special. in that we are shunting around potentially hundreds of thousands of geographic points that may make up points, lines, of polygons. So it is a bit different to serving a web page with text and a couple of pictures on it.
Yeah, exactly. And we're hitting that now with 10,000 people working at home or close to it. How they access that spatial information. Some of our systems are under too much load and falling over. So we're looking at how do we change that to meet that demand, and that is using services rather than using data so much. So use a service where we can.
Yeah. And Tim, how about yourself? What are some of the challenges that you've faced on your journey to, do we actually use the word digitalization? I kind of like it, so perhaps we can.
Yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with that word, Chris. Yeah, look, similar to what Peter was talking about, really, so that bit about, well, we've always done it this way, why do we need to do it differently? It works for us, why change the things that we do? And so a lot of that's talking about, what's your customer expectation, what are your employee expectations of how these things should be done? And we do have another bit where it's not necessarily part of people's, so digitizing processes and solutions isn't necessarily part of a team's BAU. So it's about saying, well, who's going to pay for the project? Where's it going to come from? How are we going to deliver that project? Yeah, we get it. It makes sense, but it's not within our budget. Our budget's to do A, and you're talking about developing B so we can do A. And so that becomes a bit of a problem, and you have to look at the different ways that we can manage and budget for those ones. And to what Peter was talking about infrastructure, that's been a really interesting journey for us as well. So pushing out to looking at cloud services. So 5 years ago, you were in government, you talk about cloud services and it was just a hard no, right? We have to onshore all of our data.
Yep.
We can't host things in the cloud. It has to be our data centers. A lot of work was being about, we need to deliver bigger and better data centers rather than leveraging cloud solutions. And now that conversation's turned, and it's like, well, actually, okay, we now actually realize that we will need to leverage cloud services. So now we have to go on that journey of, well, what do they need to look like? How are we going to deliver them? How do we access them? How do they work within our existing structures? So we've had to push really hard at that, at the edge of that, to try and get those right solutions so that we can have so we can deliver on some of the things that we want to do.
And just following on from what Tim said, sorry, Chris, that also comes from the top. So the exec, getting to the exec and getting them to understand the benefits of digital transformational and how their business can work smarter. That's one of the challenges we've never really cracked terribly well. But now we probably have an opportunity to get back to the exec and start explaining the benefits of doing it.
Yeah, which is really interesting, and that also pulls us conveniently to our next point of topic, is how do you overcome these sort of challenges? I think from where we sit, it's often a bit of a battle to demonstrate, the benefits. You can do a sort of cost-benefit analysis on it, but there's always a certain amount of skepticism as to, what's going to be delivered. And with spatial projects too, often, the technology isn't well understood. What's your strategy there, Peter, for, I suppose, delivering the message that brings spatial into the digital transformation process is worthwhile?
Man, this is a hard question. Traditionally we've done it project by project. So as Tim was alluding to, you get asked to do a project or run a project or be part of a project, but that project is to deliver a product. They don't see it necessarily as a goal to transform their business at the same time. You do get some that want to do that, and an example is coming up later. So we've traditionally pushed it through projects and said, look, we can do it this way, which is the old-fashioned way, or we could do it a new way. It might cost a little bit more, and sometimes we've taken that cost on internally for ourselves, so we can take that step and try and not drag the business is wrong, but show the business the benefit. The other part that we are getting better at is explaining the corporate good. So things around, we only have to do this once and everybody can use it, rather than having everybody do it themselves. So, and as the mindset in the business units change, then that sort of resonates a little bit. And the other driver is people now want to share their data, so they want to get their stuff out and show what they've been doing. And the only way to do that is digitally. So they come to us and say, can we share this information with other agencies, blah, blah, and we go, yeah, sure, but you've got to do A, B, C, and D to get there. And they're pretty happy to jump on board and do that. So it's been a bit piecemeal and ad hoc, but yeah, we are working on it through project type scenarios.
Yeah. And Tim, how about yourself? In some ways, I've been lucky enough to come to some of these GovHack meetings, and there's a certain amount of energy and what's the word for it? Inertia that you seem to get when GovHack's being run. Is it a similar sort of thing that you need to do when you are working with your internal customers to help them deliver their projects better?
Yeah, look, absolutely. You know, and I think that a lot of what we do is we try and keep bringing it back to the customer. You know, what's the customer expectation? What do your customers expect? And the reality is that all of us live in the digital world now, and so most of the people that you deal with, they get it, right? Because they leave work and they go home and they, you know, access a digital world, and you say that's the same experience that we should be delivering to our customers through the things that we do, because that's their expectation. They expect to be able to go to a solution and get what they want through their phone, and that's what we need to be delivering for. And so if we keep bringing it back to the customer, and for us, the customer can be either an internal employee or an external customer, so whoever is the end user of the solution, and just keep bringing it back to that. What's the customer expectation? You know, do they expect to actually have to wade through paper forms, or do they expect that they can actually do it via their phone, right?
Yeah,
And then it becomes much easier to have those conversations.
Yeah, and that's really interesting too. I mean, the whole sort of social media experience and certain platforms and their ease of use and speed of data retrieval and how they work are things that we're asked when we're working for clients to sort of deliver in the work sense. And that's great. We've got something to aim to, but there's also a bit of challenge there in terms of the budgets that might be available to do this, to set up, you know, a billion user social platform does cost some money. So when you get these sort of requests to provide functionality that is that fluid and does have a price tag associated with it, how do you have the discussions, or you know, yeah, how do you deal with that?
Yeah. So that, you know, minimal viable product, proof of concept, the idea of, because not everything is going to work, right? So for every successful social media site, there's probably 5 or 6 that have failed, you know, have never made it to see the light of day, or had a very short lifespan, because it's about that test and learn process. You need to go and work out what works, what resonates with your customers, and then build on that. So don't try and don't try and, you know, scale it to 1 billion users on day one. Scale it to, you know, 50, 100, and then think that absolutely, you know, you have to have that planning up front. We want to have that size audience at the end, but we're not going to build for that for day one until we actually see success and actually look at how we can, you know, scale the solution.
Yeah, indeed, it's a very good point. So we're now going to look at a couple of examples from both of your different realms on how spatial has been applied in a digital transformation sense. We're going to look at a couple of videos, and then hopefully you can talk us through what we're having a look at as we look at those. So the first application that we will look at is an application done by Tim's group called the Incident Response Planning application. And I should be able to get a video going just about now. So Tim, can you see that okay?
I can see that. So for our roads maintenance crews, when there's roads that are closed via different events, they have to bring out an incident response plan, which are currently paper-based plans, which are in huge folders that they have to pull out of the back of their truck to put the detours in place. And so these plans show where the detours go and what they need to do to close a road. So we digitized this and turned it into an app so where employees can find the section of road that they need to close. They can see on a map where the detour is, where to put the signs in, what signs they need, whether they need traffic control as part of this detour, you know, right down to which way the arrow should point on the sign, and whereabouts on the road that they need to put it, so that they can very quickly and easily put in a detour for a section of the roads that we manage. You know, as I said previously, all of these plans are in paper-bound folders, which work quite well as long as you have the folder in the car with you when you need to actually action one of these plans, and you have the most up-to-date plan put into the folder. So we found that this was a great way for crews on the road to have access to all of the incident response plans for the entire state on their phone.
And this is also, so offline access, that's something you've got as well? What
yeah,
happens
look, so
when
that
you're
was
out of
really,
range?
yeah, that was something that was really important to us. So a lot of these crews are working in areas where they'll be in a black spot and they won't have access to a network. So the solution had to work offline as well as it did online, and so we that was baked into the solution right at the beginning. Going back to that, when I talked about that minimum viable product, that was we had you know 3 key things that were the basis of the minimum viable product, and that was that had to be available offline. It had to automatically update once they were back in the network and we could push updates to it, and it needed to obviously hold the plans and so have the information about the different plans across the state road network. And that was where we started it. You know, we had a very long list of what it could be, but we just started with what it needs to be to get up and going and get in the hands of the crews that are out there putting these detours in place.
And any plans for extending it? So now it's being used by the crews, but it would seem that there might be other groups that, especially in emergency services and whatnot, that could find it really useful.
Yeah, look, absolutely. So both internally, so we have, so this is aimed at our regional maintenance road crews. So it was based at regional, but we have metropolitan crews that could access it as well. We have other forms of transport as well, so it could work for railways. So if you think that there's an outage on an incident on one of the rail networks, what's the plan for managing that particular incident, so we can use it for that. And equally, this we're looking and we're seeing how we can actually deploy this out to other agencies that have the power to close roads if required. For example, RFS during fire season, New South Wales Police and other agencies that may have the power to close roads and may need to, and put a detour in place as well. So that's absolutely on the roadmap for where we're going to go with this.
Yeah, very good. We'll cross now to Peter, who is going to talk us through a project that he's certainly championed from particularly a spatial perspective. And this project is one that's been conducted by the planning group of the planning department, part of the cluster. And we have a video on this. I'll let Pete talk through as well. So Pete, just press play.
Yeah. So about 18 or 18 months ago, the e-planning team came to us and said they wanted to replace the spatial viewer that was part of the New South Wales planning portal. So we came up with this solution where people can search for an address or a point of interest, like the Sydney Opera House or Lot DP, or even LGA, and then you can find on a specific property or the planning constraints that affect that property. So this was designed for public use, and it is a public website, but a lot of professional planning businesses use this to give them information they need. This is one of the first sites, spatial viewers for this information across the world. It's one of the few, and possibly the only one, that does a whole jurisdiction. So it does all of New South Wales. Whereas before, if you're looking at a property and you're crossing LGAs, you had to go and find different PDF documents from a convoluted process and website. Now all that information's on the screen in front of you, and you can look at a property on one side of the LGA boundary to the other and get a report, and that report is a PDF that you can look at and tells you all the planning constraints that affect your property. The old one only dealt with local environmental plans, and this one also takes into consideration state environmental planning policy. So there's about 100 and odd layers that get intersected every time someone does a search of a property. I should make special mention of the e-planning team that pull the data together and update the data. They're a big player in this process. We did the viewer, but they do a lot of the data management side of it, and it's their product.
Yeah, and so just I guess circling in on that. So this process, if you had to carry this out manually to go and sort of seek all this data out, because this helps you to do things like support DA submissions.
Yep.
You know, we're talking days and weeks of time now reduced to, you know, perhaps let's say a button click, but it is a bit of a button click. So
it's not much more than that. So the time it took to watch that video, you could get your property intersection and report created, whereas it would take you, up to weeks to do that. You know, to search all the different pieces of paper you needed to search. Now you can do it within a couple of minutes. So it is a massive improvement, and hopefully we save a fair bit of people creating PDFs. Normally there's a couple of hundred PDFs per LGA that get created to cover that same information. So we're trying to get away from that, and that would be the next step beyond what we've just done.
Yeah, so looking at the project from perhaps a high level, as well as some specific objectives that it did achieve, i.e. the retrieval of that data in a very timely fashion. Can you tell us a bit about adoption and some of the benefits and impact it's had beyond the original goals? Like, we started with these objectives, we achieved those, but it also led to more.
Yeah, so a couple of them, which we knew we were going to get, was a standardization in the data and the way the data is captured and imported into the database. So behind all this is a really rigorous data management process that the e-planning guys undertake, and they make sure that they've started standardizing on things like units rather than feet or meters. They've picked one and run with it, cleaning up some of the data quality issues that were inherent in the data, and they continue to do that. One of the flow-on benefits is that this data is now available publicly as well through map services, and councils are now starting to pick those services up and use them internally rather than having to create their own internal data sets for the same thing. So they're now using the department's data, which is the true and legal copy of the data, inside their own processes and systems now, and they can concentrate on council specific work rather than having to duplicate the creation of LEPs, and especially the SEPs where the department creates those from scratch. And now we have an authoritative source that they can go to. So it frees up a number of councils to concentrate on the stuff that's important to them and not so much the stuff that is more important to the department, I guess.
Yeah, and I can also see that, and I've mentioned this before, that the highly performant nature of Matprod 3 makes this quite doable for people. They
Yeah,
can actually they can bring these services straight into desktop GIS as well.
yeah. And if I'm a little bit selfish, it's also given us a first foray into the cloud. So it then gives us our mechanism and process to be more cloud-based, which allows us to service more clients, as you were saying, so through services. So it was good for us to have a project that pushed us to the cloud in terms of making SLAs and availability type functions, and that has allowed us to build a process to push all our spatial data to the cloud eventually, and how we can serve that, and some of those learnings out of what the cloud means for us have been really important and beneficial into the future.
Yeah, nice. And while it'd be tempting to go down the path of discussing some of the other interesting aspects, like moving the spatial operations into the database and out of the traditional GIS, I won't. And we'll cross
Save that for
across
another
to
time.
another time. Tim, so with the IRP project, you know, from where I'm sitting, it looked like it was very well received for the target audience. But what other benefits came from going through that project?
Yeah, look, it has been very well received by the team that uses it, and you know, they really see that it has lots of benefits, and we have had discussions with them about where to next. But yeah, interestingly, the kind of additional benefits is that, as I sort of alluded to before, a whole lot of other areas where you know, we hadn't thought that would, you know, the applications of it, but are now beginning to sort of raise their head about the other forms of transport. So through the you know, through the rail system, through metropolitan areas and all of that. So it is actually the opportunity for, and really what we have is, you know, is a tool that at one end says, here's an incident, this is where it is, and at the other end says, well, this is the solution, this is the action to take. So really anywhere where you have those two sort of pieces, it can work for that. So if you've got, you know, a geographical location and an action's required at that particular point, we can show what that action is all in the one tool. And that was one of the things that, you know, we worked with really early on, was about, you know, let's think about, whilst we didn't know necessarily where it would go, we always wanted to go, well, we think it will go other places. Let's make sure that whatever we do is reusable and expandable for other areas. And now we're beginning to see those opportunities. We know that the actual the work to get there won't be as great as it would be if you were doing all of these things one at a time.
Yeah, and having worked with you on that project, we've, you know, also been quite aware that you're looking at standardizing ways of doing things, your design patterns and whatnot. So you've just picked up there that this kind of almost, and to get a bit techie, application architecture is something that you could you know, reuse and extend elsewhere. So there's, you know, there's going to be efficiency gains. You don't have to keep rebuilding the wheel each time these sorts of projects would be embarked upon.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you just take that little bit of extra time at the beginning to think, you know, let's make sure that everything that we do is reusable, is expandable, has applications, you know, where it has applications elsewhere, they can pick it up and use it with absolutely not having to reinvent the wheel. So yeah, so and you know, and that just saves you so much time and effort down the track.
Well, the two very interesting projects. I suppose the next question, and I'm sure many of our audience would have the same question, is what's ahead? What are the next steps? Is it more of the same, Tim?
Yeah, look, for us, absolutely. We're in fact, you know, all of government is going through a change at the moment, and we are evolving as an organisation. We're getting we're coming together with the broader transport across all areas. So we're actually having a lot of doors open to us where they're crying out for the sort of the opportunities and the skills that we bring. And so I think that we'll really get, you know, supercharged over the next 12 months, 12 or 18 months, and do more of the same and more other things as well, you know, in terms of anywhere we can help other teams and other parts of the organisation on their digitalisation journey, will be in demand and we'll be there helping them.
Yeah, very good. And Peter, yourself?
Yeah, pretty much the same as Tim. We'll continue on the journey that we're on now in terms of moving to the cloud and making our data more available through services and improving the infrastructure around that. There's a number of projects running at the moment where businesses are sort of transforming themselves to some degree into more digital process, and we get involved in those, and we'll continue to push those along. It's also about making our data more available, more open to users, whether that's internal or external. The other part of it that we'll be doing is looking at the information management processes behind it and making sure we have good information governance so that we know what data is going where, who says yes or no, who says what you can use it for and how you can use it, but always with the lens to making it as open as possible, and then building those platforms to enable that.
Yeah, and it's pleasing to hear that from both of you, because I think there's also the intergovernment agency aspect to this as well. So if things are being done in a fairly standardised way between departments, that also lends itself well to efficient government and delivery of services.
Yeah, exactly. And as Tim was saying, we don't want to replicate. If other government has done the job already, we don't want to have to do it ourselves. We want to pick it up. So, you know, if we could use Tim's app for national park closures, we'll come and talk to Tim and see what we could do. So, the same with core data sets that come out of spatial services. We're all part of the one government. We should be able to share and reuse as wherever possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pleasing to hear. All right, well, I guess that concludes or brings us to the conclusion of this webinar. So I'd like to thank both Tim and Peter for your time. It's been an enjoyable discussion. And if anybody watching this does have questions, please send them through to us. There may be a few links published as well to some of the material that we've talked about throughout the webinar. So thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks,